All right, Mod House Tungsten review time. Been listening to these very heavily for the last month plus. I did a quick sneak peek video when I got these. This is part of the package deal with the Inlium portable desktop amp thingamagigger. Anyway, so they came in a nice flight case together and cool matching colorways and whatnot. But this is just going to be a review of the headphone, and then I will do that amp as a separate video because there's lots to talk about for both of them. We're going to do some comparisons against other big planars that you might expect to see: Caldera, Susvara, Empyrean 2, and actually the Hyphen HE6 SE V2 as well, just, you know, for a pair of headphones that takes a ridiculous amount to drive. And yes, these are power hungry, as the legend goes, and so we'll talk about amplification as well, what worked, what didn't at the end. So I'll start a little bit with build. So this is, made by Mod House, and most of the body here is 3D printed, and for the most part I think that's okay. 3D printing is not like just a hobbyist sort of technology anymore. It's very much used in a lot of manufacturing of small batch or precision items, where you're not going to spend the money to set up an injection molding tool, which are very expensive, or machine things out of plastics or metals. So it's a great process. I will say, you are aware of it. It results in a finish that is, not going to be exactly at the level of one of those other processes I just mentioned. I think these are all painted, and there's kind of a texture to the paint, which, might cut both ways. When I hold them, they feel solid. There's nothing about them that says like, oh, these are flimsy or gonna fall apart. And like the metal band is really nice, and all the hardware chosen, and these are nice little machined guys. Everything's like really thoughtfully done, really nicely executed. But at the end of the day, that material story just isn't as nice as some other things in this sort of price or size class. The pads are swappable. We'll talk about that a little later down the road. The headphone mounting point is recessed, which drives me bonkers. They do come with a really nice cord, which we'll also look at in a sec. But it looks nice when the cables are in there, but it just limits what cables are going to fit if you already happen to own some nice cables with the 3.5 termination, which it does have, which is great. But just in terms of that recessed, making just a physical limit to what actually fits in there. First impressions, getting this thing out of the box, plugging it in, really hadn't broken into that point, but just that it felt muscular. The sound felt really muscular, forceful. The detail was very present, very obvious. The sort of technical prowess was not questionable right out of the box. Once dialed in, I think, finding like, what is the right amp for this? How do you get this in? Like maybe a little EQ, like once dialed in, just very powerful, very confident presentation. Properly driven, it has just big, weighty bass that just is very rewarding to listen to, very enjoyable. It won't help tracks that are a little hot already. It does have, it can be a little bit of a hot presentation sometimes. So like, my nemesis, like really hard piano strikes, can be like, oof, pretty intense. So yeah, I do think that's a little bit of a character of it. Let's talk about pads. Let me grab the other pads real quick. It does come with two sets of pads. These are the suede pads, and on it I have the sort of cowhide. Very nice that two sets of pads are included. Makes a lot of sense with the history of Mod House and the other products that they produce. The pad swapping is just ridiculously easy. Pad off. Done. So it does invite you to play around and go back and forth between them, and I did. I think for me, with the suede, there's just less scale and extension to the bass. There's just less energy overall. Presentations may be a little cleaner, but I very much preferred the other headphone or the other pads. But great, just like cool. They're both in there. You can choose, maybe even kind of swap around based on what you're in the mood to listen to. I think it'll probably have different synergies, and since it's so dead easy to swap them, like Cool. All right. So let's get into some comparisons here. Caldera, if you've seen other videos on the channel, you know that's pretty much my favorite headphone right now, you know, for quite a while. Again, it needs to be properly paired and driven, but it is, you know, nowhere near as demanding as the Tungsten here. I would say the Tungsten is a bit more impactful and a bit drier overall. It's more forceful, but it's maybe less nuanced. It can feel a little more energetic, a little more exciting at times, swapping back and forth between them, but not sort of as natural as what you get from the Caldera, which is one of the qualities that I really like about it. On certain tracks, I'd say the Tungsten can feel a little bit more spacious than the Caldera, but the Caldera just has this weight to the sound, and I'm not saying like, oh, you know, it's just got like big heavy bass or something. It's just every note has a body to it and a weight to it, and I think sometimes the Tungsten gets a little bit thinner sounding. Definitely has an edge and a presence to the sound that can be very addictive and make the Caldera feel a little pulled back or a little soft at times. But like switching to the Caldera, listening to like classical, you just feel like there's more of the room that's understandable. There's more like information, like you're like, oh, right, this quartet is playing in a library. Probably pretty placebo-y, but I do think there's just a level of sort of micro detail ambiance information that comes through a little bit more clearly in the Caldera for me to set the stage a little bit. But yeah, the Tungsten has a weight, a fullness that's really attractive. Sometimes it feels a little like clumsy compared to the Caldera, which is maybe, you know, dancing around more subtly. And the Tungsten, I think, tends to pull things apart a little bit more. So it makes everything more of a moment. It's like it's got that drama. But the Caldera then comes in and softens and connects things and pulls them back together in a way that's also really nice. So yeah, there's a crispness. There's a little bit of a papery quality almost to the Tungsten that comes out when you're comparing against the Caldera. Right, compared to the Meze Empyrean 2, the Tungstens are definitely come off as drier, leaner, less saturated, maybe a little narrower or flatter, like less depth, more two-dimensional in their presentation. Way more energy, way more intensity. There's like a fullness and a saturation of each element with the Mezes, and an impact of each element with the Tungsten. You know, it's like when you go from the Meze to the Tungsten, it's just like, wow, I just woke up. I just like had that, you know, first shot of espresso in the morning. I might be a little woolly and unkempt, you know, my hair might still be a little bit of a mess, but my eyes just, you know, came into focus and I'm ready to start the day. I think that's a sort of fair analogy from going back and forth between them. All right. So I decided that I wanted to give the Tungstens no hold bars power. And so I plugged them into, I have a special adapter box, and I hooked them into the amps in my main 2-channel system, speaker system, which are a pair of Modrite monoblocks. They're 100 watts, Class AB, pushing these things. They're pretty much in pure Class A, I'm sure. And I wanted a little bit of a sparring partner. And so I got back out the old HE6 SE V2, which are a super bargain in my book, and just love power. Love all the power you can give them. So yeah, it's a really fun listening session to go back and forth between these guys. I even spun some vinyl, which I don't normally do with headphones, just to kind of take a little break from digital, listening to Dexter Gordon's Go. And the Tungsten, unsurprisingly, has a great deal more clarity, nuance, range, more sophisticated presentation. The HE6 is almost a little more sort of enveloping. It can get a little peaky and semblant, and generally unrefined. But again, I'm reminded of what a great value it is considering the price if you have the power to go with it. It actually can dig a little deeper into the sub bass and produce some of that like substantial rumbling bass feel if you're, you know, watching movies or whatnot. And, you know, really does a great job of presenting that. I think if you could, if you could sort of combine some of the weight and tonality and atmospheric vibe of the HE6 SEV2, but with the treble and mid-range articulation and nuance of the tungsten, that would be my happy place. But you know, if it's like pick one, well, tungsten all the way. But still, super fun listening, and man, that HE6 is a lot of fun for the money. All right, last but not least, the Susvara. So going from the tungsten to the Susvara's got almost like a little bit of a floaty, ephemeral kind of vibe by comparison. It feels like less grounded, but the Susvara is very extended. It feels softer overall, less weight and less impact, but also feels a bit more balanced, less likely to sort of peak out on you or hit a wall. It takes about 15% less power to drive this is farther than the tungsten, which is kind of hilarious because this has often been the benchmark for pain in the butt to drive. The tungsten is drier. It's definitely more energetic, but the Susvara is more resolving. There's more space for the mids to shine. The tungsten's like you went from having the band playing like going from the tungsten to this is far. It's sort of like the band was playing in your head to like, oh, I'm now in the room with the band playing. So you get that more of that sense of stage. You get more of that sense of, you know, location of the instruments and sort of the ambience of the room. The tungsten, you know, brings a lot of exciting weight and body and impact and momentum, but it can't match the detail and the finesse of the Susvara. It's still sort of the king of that territory for me. It's cleaner, it's more controlled, it's more nuanced, but yeah, it doesn't sort of wake you up or give you that slam or impact in the same way that the tungsten does. So different strokes for different folks. Amplification. So I only had a handful of things that could drive this successfully. The Taboo, honorable mention. It sounded really great, but I just had the volume completely pinned, and you know, there wasn't enough headroom there on certain tracks. But it sweetens it up a bit, and it makes it kind of a bit more intimate. It's really nice. The LTA Z10E, which is kind of my benchmark reference, is just the best. It was such a good pairing for this. Powerful, spacious, precise, detailed. A smidge dry, I would say. Like if I had that kind of power on hand, but with something to warm it up a little bit, that might be a better match for this guy. Like when I went from a couple other amps to the Z10E, I finally understood the bass that this thing could produce, which just wasn't as present. And that's, I think, what you kind of realize is if you're not properly driving this, you just lose some of those lower octaves pretty quickly, and everything gets a little bit softer, and you're just not getting what this thing can really do. And it's not to say that it sounds terrible or anything, but you're just kind of missing out. As I mentioned, I ran these with some Modrite Class AB 100-watt monoblocks. That was super fun. These things just felt like super emboldened, like unwavering, almost brutalist at times. But man, it's pretty cool to see what something like this, what a demanding headphone like this can do when you really give it the juice. And then, of course, the Ilium that it's paired with was great. It's full, it's sweet, it's rich. Sometimes it's just like it's the bee's knees. And other times I felt like there was still room, that we weren't quite getting all of what the tungsten has to offer. Strangely, it sort of seemed like when I plugged the Susvara into this, that they almost wanted more power. And so that probably has to do with sort of current drive and things that I don't really understand. But anyway, this thing sounded phenomenal with the tungsten, and in many ways some of those listening notes about being drier or papery or a little flatter, those aren't as present with these. This is kind of helping to bring that. And the Ilium, I mean, it reminds me of the what is the 23R? Anyway, all right. Anyway, they're old amp that I like. Yeah. Anyway, lost my train of thought. But like I said, I think the Z10A was kind of the best, got the most out of the tungsten. But I do think the Ilium offered a wonderful pairing and sort of softened some of those edges that had sort of been sticking out to me. Cables, comes with a very nice Viking weave cable. Oh. Hello. So very nice cable. See, it's got these nice small terminations that fit easily in here. And this one, since it came with the paired with the HBA 23 RMH, that sort of has a 1/4 inch, so it makes sense to have a 1/4 inch, but I think when you order them, you can have whatever you want. 4-pin XLR, 4.4, blah, 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 blah. I will say, and I think this cable is trying to kind of warm up the tungsten a little bit, maybe. But the other cable that I had that could fit in here was an old balanced Periapp cable I had. And I wasn't actually running it balanced. I had a little XLR to 1/4 inch adapter on the end. But that cable brought out a little more clarity in these, a little more separation, which was nice depending on the amp it was paired with. So with the Ilium, it actually kind of sounded a little better to me. And then with the kind of naturally drier and cleaner Z10E, then I did prefer the included cable. Pretty subtle, as it always is with cables. So yeah, I mean, final thoughts. Do you like breathy, whispery, sort of detailed, crispy, textury stuff? Do you like slam and impact and body? Then this is definitely a headphone to consider for you. If you want something sweet and luscious and soft, I think there's other large planars that are kind of more aligned to that taste. But with the proper amp pairing, you can kind of bring in a bit more of that richness and lushness and still get some of the fun, energy, and impact that I think this headphone does so well. So yeah, bit long-winded, but there you go. The Modrite Tungsten. This is Signcraft signing out.